All right, everybody. Welcome to the winter meeting of the IGBC committee. And so really appreciate having folks actually being able to see people in person. And I apologize, it's a little awkward to have somebody behind me, so I'll probably turn around and make some eye contact, but that's very new. So it's not happening. But I am the current chair. This is my last meeting, so I'm finishing a 2-year term. My day job is as the Deputy Regional Forester for the Rocky Mountain region of the U.S. Forest Service, and this is my 13th year of being a part of the IGBC. And so very, very excited and happy to be a part of what we're going to do in the next couple of days. And welcome to all of you who are not from Bozeman. We always have a lot of discussion of where we should have meetings at. It seems like Montana is the right place for these winter meetings, but we decided we would try Bozeman this time. We've been in Missoula prior to COVID, and this is a really nice space. Want to commend David Diamond here for helping us find a spot to meet at, and hopefully we'll be able to enjoy it. I think the weather's going to be good, right, David? Next 3 days, you guarantee it. Yes.
I think Matt was looking for sunshine.
Okay, not sunshine, maybe a little gray, maybe sun.
This is balmy and.
All right, well, that's what I was shooting for. That's what we were aiming for. Tomorrow for the public, we're gonna start at 10 a.m. and we'll be in the same place. And then on Thursday, I think we start at 9 a.m. Yeah, we'll see how this goes. And I encourage everybody to participate though. Both the folks who are part of the committee and then members of the public and interested parties as we provide those opportunities. We're still experimenting a little bit with technology. I think we all know that going forward, a bit of a hybrid world is where we're going to be dwelling in. And so we've got even some members of our committee that are joining us remotely, as well as I think probably some members of the public and other groups that are on. So, bear with us if you're out there in the virtual world, because, it takes a few minutes to kind of get into a rhythm of who you're talking to on screen and who you're talking to, and behind us. And so bear with us, but we would ask if we cue you up to speak that you turn your camera on, if at all possible, so the members of the subcommittees that are out there or other members of the IGBC as a whole, if we call on you, if you could show your face, we would really appreciate that too. And always, for me, the last 2 years, I've always liked to start out these meetings, the bigger meetings, with doing that little bit of a reminder, and reading the mission statement for why we are spending this time together and the work we're trying to do. So the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, IGBC, supports recovery, delisting, and ongoing conservation of grizzly bear populations and their habitats in areas of the Western United States through interagency coordination of policy, planning, management, research, and communication. So saying that, I ask that folks think about, as we go through these topics, as we're listening, as we're participating, as we are representing the different agencies and groups that we do, that you think about that and come into the meeting kind of holding on to that a little bit, because we next year will be the 40th year of IGBC. So there's been a long commitment to carrying out this work. And we've really have had a lot of success and a lot of good things have come out of this. We still have a lot of things in front of us that maybe we're not 100% sure of how we're going to go forward with some of it. But I want to recognize 40 years, 39 years of commitment is pretty astounding. So just want to think about the mission, think about the time and effort and energy folks have put into this, and just carry that through the next 3 days. I think when we talk about, the success and where this started 40 years ago and where we are today, again, even though there's challenges and questions and uncertainty in front of us on some of these points, there's just, again, there are bears, and there's healthy populations out there, and we still have work to do to continue where with the bears in different areas. We have a lot of work to do around information and education and outreach, but we're in a better place than we were 39 years ago. So just again, hold on to that as we go forward. I also think it is important to recognize, so you have representatives that come from the states, from our federal partners agencies. But when I talk about the success we've had, a lot of work that has happened over that time, a lot of it has come from the public and from other interested parties and groups outside the core of the states and the federal partners that have really helped to move us to a better place in regard to, dealing with the bears, living with the bears, helping communities to think about having bears in their areas. And so we want to recognize that, because that's part of the success. That's part of what has made some of this progress possible. So it isn't just the named members of the committee, but it's all the folks who've taken the time and committed the effort into helping us move forward. And then in a few minutes, you're going to hear some formal updates from the different members. And so there's a lot of news to be shared. There's a lot going on right now. And we've seen, I think there's been quite a bit of activity the last couple of weeks with the subcommittees. If you pay attention to newsprint and news media, there's been quite a bit out there. But we're going to hear directly from the different members and what they have going on, what they are responsible for, and what they are moving forward with. So that'll be interesting, no doubt. But before we do that, because we have this half in, half out world of the hybrid meeting, we want to hear folks introduce themselves, right, David? And so maybe. Do you want to start with the folks on camera? That might be the easiest, David, if you want to call them out. And again, as we call your name, if you could actually pop your face up if you're on the virtual world, so folks can see you and make some recognition in regard to who you are.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. And I'm looking at the online, and most of the members of IGBC Executive Committee are here in Bozeman. There's a few folks that are joining virtually. Forest Service Region 4, Elise, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Yes, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, if you could make that camera on so we get your presence in the room with us, that would be great. And then I'm looking for, let's see. Garth Mowat is on from British Columbia. Garth, can you say hello? Nope, we're not hearing you, Garth.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect. That's perfect.
Hello, everyone from British Columbia. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. And I think we're going to have Paul Frame from Alberta a little bit later. But then let me recognize our subcommittee chairs, and all three have their cameras on now. Maybe Don in North Cascades, if we start with you.
Howdy. I hope everybody is well. Just for the record, that's actually an Alaska Denali bear in my background.
Good to know.
Thanks. And JJ is the chair of the Bitterroot Committee.
Good afternoon, everybody. JJ Tier, I'm the regional supervisor for Idaho Fish and Game in the Clearwater region here in Lewiston, Idaho, and outgoing chair of the Bitterroot. So,
thanks for being with us today. And
thank
Ben.
you, Dave.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ben Conard, outgoing chair for the Selkirk and Cabinet Yaak Ecosystems Subcommittee. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where I'm the deputy supervisor for the Montana Ecological Services Office.
Thanks, Ben. So, go.
Yeah, so I think that's everybody that we have on tied in with the committee on screen. So maybe Frank, we can start with you.
Good. Frank Vermaelen with the U.S. Geological Survey here out of Bozeman, team leader of the Interagency Grizzly Study Team, advisor to this committee.
Hillary Cooley, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Grizzly Bear Recovery Coordinator. I am out of Missoula and I'm an advisor as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia Reagan. I'm also with the USGS here in Bozeman, and I'm the Center Director for the Northern Rocky Mountain Science Center.
Hi, everyone. Jennifer Carpenter from the National Park Service. I represent the Intermountain region, which is 3 parks, Grand Teton National Park, Yellowstone National Park, and Glacier. My day job is in Yellowstone.
Kristen McBride, I'm the Acting Assistant Director for Natural Resources in Region 6, the Pacific Northwest Regional Forces.
Good afternoon, I'm Jim Fredericks, Deputy Director for Idaho Department of Fish and Game, and I'll explain a little more why I'm here when we do agency updates.
You know me, David.
I'm David Diamond. I'm the Executive Coordinator of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee.
Lori Roberts, I work for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks on the NCD trend monitoring team, but I am the IENO Chair and advisor to this group.
And I'm Rick King, Chief of the Wildlife Division for Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Hello, Scott Jackson, Forest Service National Carnivore Program Lead, and I'm based in Missoula. And I'm an advisor to this group as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Boone, the Program Lead for Wildlife and Threatened Endangered Species, BLM Montana Dakota State Office.
John Snyder, Assistant Regional Director for USDA Wildlife Services. I'm not sure what my role is.
We're glad you.
We are.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ben South. I work for the Forest Service. I am a Deputy Regional Forester here in Region 1 in Missoula, Montana.
Good afternoon, Hannah Anderson. I'm the Wildlife Diversity Division Manager and the Grizzly Bear Policy Lead at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Hey, everyone, Matt Hogan, Regional Director for the Fish and Wildlife Service for the Mountain Prairie region in Denver County.
I'm Hugh Morris. I'm the Acting Regional Director for the Pacific region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
So I think we've recognized all of the members. So I do want to mention that this is a public meeting. There are public comment opportunities at the end of each session. So this afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, and Thursday midday. And then do you want to have folks?
I would. So if you all would bear with me, I'd love to know who's sitting behind me. So maybe we could start over in this corner. Captain Trevor with the Attorney General's office.
Tony Boudreau with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game.
Mike Edmondson with the Idaho Governor's Office. I'm the Administrator at the Office of Species Conservation.
Josh Riordan, the Terrestrial Program Manager and Policy Advisor to the Office of Species Conservation in Idaho.
Bush, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Region 1. Sandy Fisher, Fish and Wildlife Service Region 1 and incoming chair for the Federal Ecosystem Subcommittee. Abby Sage, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Cecily Gusto, Montana Fish and Wildlife.
Galen Tidwell, USDA Wildlife Services, Montana State.
Aaron Brooks Schifrin, Greater Yellowstone Coalition Wildlife Conservation Coordinator. And about some of the people on carnivores, the large carnivore conflict prevention specialist.
Afternoon, Chris Abbott, Forest Service located in Missoula, Montana. Backable biologist with integrations. It's a very citizen.
Full night, volunteer with the Galaxy Wildlife Association.
Ecological Services Field Office, Field Supervisor. And I have Porter.
Dan, man, I couldn't see you and like, yeah, I didn't see you too. This is why I want to see who's behind it, because I have some old friends.
Jackie's also the poet laureate of the IGBC. You forgot to add that. Classification and fun.
Gotcha. Okay, David.
Well, we've got 25 folks online. I don't know. Yeah, I will do that.
How do you, well, let's walk through who's online and see if it'll pop up.
So again, we'll quickly, for folks that are online, if you have access to your camera or your microphone, I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. And if you again, just say sort of your name, affiliation, if you have one that you want to share, and where you're dialing in from. So Austin Terrell. Okay.
Thank you, Steve. Austin. Can you hear us?
Brittany Rosas. Chris Bachman. CNS Missoula.
Yeah, they blocked from talking or?
Yeah, so Brittany says vital ground, and her microphone isn't working. Thank you, Brittany. Thanks for joining us. Rosie Costain.
I'm Rosie Costin with People and Carnivores. I'm joining out of Bozeman, and I'll be with you guys in person tomorrow.
Great, thanks, Rosie. Dan Thompson.
There. Hi, Dan Thompson from Wyoming Game and Fish, joining from Lander, Wyoming.
Thanks, Dan. Alyssa Chott.
Alyssa Chott with the Great Bear Foundation in Missoula.
Jennifer Fort North.
Hi, Jennifer Fort Norris with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Missoula.
Jim Morrison.
Hi, Jim Morrison, interested citizen in Missoula.
Kim Annis.
Hi, Kim Annis, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, grizzly bear specialist out of Libby.
Amber Cornack.
Hey, Amber Kornick, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out of Helena.
Matt Cuzacrio.
Hey, Matt Cuzacrio, Greater Yellowstone Coalition out of Lander, Wyoming.
Amy McNamara.
Hi, Amy McNamara. I'm the Northern Rockies Director for the Natural Resources Defense Council. I look forward to joining you in person tomorrow.
Thanks, Amy. Tracy.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I am Tracy Melbahas with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm an Assistant State Supervisor in Boise, Idaho.
Welcome, Tracy. Mike Bader. Okay. Steve Pizzangara.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Incoming chair for the Selkirk Cabinet Yak Subcommittee. I'm Steve Pizzangara. I'm with the Department of Fish and Wildlife out of Spokane, Washington.
Thanks, Steve. Ryan Wilbur. We're not hearing you, Ryan.
I'm Ryan from People and Carnivores out of Kalispell.
Thanks. Rory Trimbo.
Hey everybody, Rory Trimbo, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out of Kalispell.
Thanks, Rory. And Mark Weimer.
Yeah, I'm Mark Weimer, USGS, working with Claudia and Frank.
Thanks, Mark. And a note from Chris Bachman, who we went past earlier, who's the Conservation Director for the Yak Valley Forest Council. So we're, sometimes the microphones don't seem to work. I don't know. But that's everybody. That's who we've got in the room and virtual.
So thank you all for that. I mean, we've got a lot of things to talk about in the next couple of days, and we really do want folks to participate. When we get to the public section, if you have questions or you want to raise something or put something in front of us, I really encourage you. I get really disappointed because every time we have a meeting, I start out saying I really look forward to hearing from folks inside and outside of the committee. And I know the rest of the committee members feel the same way. So hopefully you will stick with us, and we'll see where we end up at on Thursday midday. Okay. David, you are going to run this forward now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're going to do agency updates in a moment, and as Jackie said, there's quite a bit going on and a lot to share. But I'm going to just do a quick sort of overview 30,000 foot, from where I'm sitting, I've been your coordinator now for about a year and a half. You can go to the next slide. Jackie already read the mission statement, but again, recovery, delisting, and ongoing conservation. So we'll go to the next slide. And the folks in the public have found this, which is great. And I just am reminding folks, because it is new, we sort of, as we plan these meetings ahead, we get the dates on the save the date. And then we have these blog entries that I get the agendas and if there's a virtual link, about 2 weeks ahead of the meeting. And then you can have your email address added to our newsletter, which will come out a few times a year and have this kind of information. The next slide. So the meat of the work of IGBC has happened at subcommittees, and we've just finished sort of the fall cycle. And I have actually been able to participate in all of those meetings. And I've learned quite a bit, and it is amazing sort of the history in each of those groups, the work products over time that have been created, and some differences in how things are handled. And what was interesting in this cycle was that I wasn't the only one that attended all of these meetings. I think people are starting to make connections, and this group is getting activated as well in thinking about the entire IGBC enterprise. So next slide. That brings us to this group of executives. So this will be your third meeting this year. We had a virtual meeting in March where we sort of iterated on these strategic goals that we're going to talk about more this week. And then we had our first in-person meeting from the pandemic in July, and got to be on the ground. We got to see the Selkirk and Cabinet Yaak and the connections in that landscape. We got to hear about people in conflict and some of the actions of local communities there. And again, we were iterating on that mission statement and on the actions of the group. And so one action that came out of that meeting was direction back to the subcommittees that has been taken up, and you're going to hear about that at this meeting, and in looking and making sure that the conservation strategies in the Yellowstone and the NCDE are up to date, and also that now beginning the process of putting the conservation strategy together in the Selkirk and the Cabinet Yaak. And then you'll recall from the strategic meeting in March as well, a proposal that we had received from Idaho Fish and Game in the previous year, sort of looking at the larger landscape and ways of organizing some of our activity across that larger landscape. So clearly we still have these subcommittees that are working to develop these conservation strategies, but then we have topics like information and education and outreach, like conflict prevention and like science, including both the population monitoring and also habitat quality. And those things we're increasingly starting to look for some connections. So that brings us to this meeting in Bozeman. Next slide. And so again, just in terms of activity of the group, very productive meeting in July, many sort of group commitments to follow up on. And again, as you'll hear, there's report outs from all of the different ships that you launched in July. So you'll hear Rick King in Yellowstone on what's happened with the conservation strategy for that ecosystem. The budget committee met in September, and we've got a report for what comes next there. The information education and outreach subcommittee has approved the FY23 projects. You'll hear more about that. We have this Bear Smart Communities. There was a working group that reported to you all in July, and then there were some executive level follow-up questions. That small group has met. There's been further discussions, and we'll be trying to bring that one home over the next 2 days. There was a small executive level group on conflict, and that they've met twice, and you're going to get a report on that. And then this idea of looking across the ecosystems on science, that didn't get pulled off prior to this meeting, but it will be happening this week. So a lot happening in the science world. In the Yellowstone ecosystem, they've had a demographic monitoring workshop in the time since our last meeting. So there's a lot in that front as well. And then finally, we always have the bear resistant container program. It's in operation. It's in operations. It receives products every single year and tests them. And this year, there's some updates that you're going to get a report on, and some things are moving, including improving the website for that program, so that when the public looks for a specific product, they can search for a cooler by name or by model number. We're looking forward to that. So that's a lot of checks next to actions that were things that you had been, that you had agreed upon in July. And then there's a few, the yellow there I've got, is the 5-year plan review and update. And that's because that's been hard. I've looked to people, and he's not here this afternoon. And in fact, I should mention this. So the director of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks is having a sort of a senior level meeting this afternoon. So we're not joined by Ken McDonald. They will be joining us during the agency, or I guess during the subcommittee update to 3:20. We'll hear Ken, and he'll give the Montana update, and we'll also hear NCD update from them. And then they will be here tomorrow in person. So I should have noted that at the front end. But Ken has a long history and has been through multiple iterations on the 5-year plan and update. And I've been trying to as a facilitator, bring this forward on multiple agendas. And we haven't had a strategic retreat like we did. Was it was 2018?
Yeah, 5 years ago.
So anyway, it's going to come up. We're trying to organize the agenda around these areas. And then the final one, which is red, is that I was asked to sort of produce a list of here's how we do meetings. And it was useful for me actually to go through the subcommittee cycle. And I want to get input from all of the executives. And there are differences in how different chairs handle things. But it is time, I think, to think about form following function. What are we trying to accomplish, and what's the most efficient way to organize our meetings? We don't necessarily have to do them the same way every time. We've been on the fly learning to do this this virtual hybrid model, but it's something that is still on the list for action. So looking ahead to the agenda for this meeting. And so again, I think directly from your executive meeting in July, we have what we're calling Conservation Strategy 101. So just a reminder of the development and substance of the conservation strategies, which are sort of the cornerstones of management in the Yellowstone and then the NCDE. And I mentioned at the beginning now of that process for the Selkirk and Cabinet Yaak. And then we're going to hear from all of the subcommittees. They've just had their fall meetings and get their input on what their 2023 and next few years look like in terms of goals and planned actions. And then, as Jackie mentioned, tomorrow morning, and that's this afternoon. So then, as Jackie mentioned, tomorrow morning, we're recognizing that the success in those of recovery in those areas, and the work on federal lands and the work of the IGBC is impressive. But so too is work of many partners that are out there. And so one of the concepts behind this Bear Smart that we've been discussing in the last several meetings is standing back as federal and state agencies and looking to local communities that want to take on work. And we've got experts and specialists that can help support them in that work. But it's going to be the local communities that voluntarily decide to either do something or not do something. And similarly, on the larger private land landscape, there's a tremendous amount of activity and action and energy in looking to reduce conflicts. And so we're going to hear from people that are investing their time and effort and expertise in those things. And that we're looking forward to those presentations and that discussion. So then we'll organize ourselves in the afternoon around these. I mentioned in the conservation strategy, you're going to hear from Hillary Cooley in a moment, the structure of those for both Yellowstone and NCDE, there's sort of a science component, the population demographics of the population. There's a habitat component. There's a information education outreach component, and there's a conflict component. And so we've got those in the local recovery zones and ecosystem subcommittees, and we also are thinking about some of those things at the larger scale. So Lori Roberts leads a team of folks that connect with all of the parts of the landscape in the information education outreach world. And she's got just a tremendous amount of actions that she's been briefing you on, and we're looking ahead to, including for this coming year, we'll be planning it, but it'll be in the following year, February 2024, bringing practitioners together. Again, not just agency, but anyone doing work in this space. And then Scott Jackson will be doing the testing program, and there's a couple moving pieces there. And then we do, I would like to try to dive in a little bit to this goal statements and planned actions and 5-year plan process, and then looking ahead to your executive time next year. And that's sort of the meetings today, so, or this week. So any questions about the agenda? Yeah, it's a little jam packed. So it's, yeah, but we're, so anyway, so next slide. I do want to just remind you of, well, I'm just gonna do this one. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So the top left is again, the scale of activity on grizzly bear conservation recovery is so much greater than this little bit of dollars from the federal agencies. Me as a coordinator and some interagency part agreement dollars that go out to things like these information education outreach grants. But I just wanted to remind you that you do as an executive committee have these assets to deploy. In FY21, we overhauled the website. In FY22, we put energy into the Bear Smart Communities concepts. And in FY23, we're going to be investing in this IEO Summit. So I just wanted to give you that. And then, well, Lori says I can do this. So we don't save it for hers, but just a reminder, again, this is now just the portion that goes out the door into information education outreach grants. And in 23, we'll be back down to the earlier levels. We had a little bit of extra dollars in 21 and 22, but the trend I want you to focus on in this slide is that we've increasingly been going beyond federal agencies and out to NGOs and other partners doing work. And the next slide. We've also increasingly been recognizing projects that are working across the larger landscape. So not just in one of the ecosystems, but in multiple ecosystems or even in all of the ecosystems. And then next slide. And then the other thing, and this is not a surprise, I'm sure, we have a lot more great projects than we can actually fund with this pot of money. And so I know it's been an over the horizon, but it's probably coming to time to have the conversation about matching and other partners and ways to expand this capacity. So that's it. And then again, so on that iteration, just a reminder, this we've talked through this before, those elements of the conservation strategies and the question about scale, geography, and partners. And that's what I have for now. And I think I'll stop come up for air and for questions. So I was trying to orient that because that could help as you go through with the agency updates in sort of where your piece plugs in to this larger enterprise of work. So Jackie, I think we'll follow the agenda in terms of organizational updates. And that means we've got U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service first on the list. And I don't know, Matt or Hugh, who wants to kick that off.
Yeah, kick it off, David, and then we're going to keep it with Hugh and Hillary as well. My part will be brief. Just a quick update on the 3 petitions we have from.
You guys all speak up a little bit too, just so folks can hear you on the owl.
The owl is not pivoting to us. So.
Maybe.
All right, I'll speak up. So we're going to tag team the update from Hillary, Hugh, and I. My part is brief, just to give an update on the 3 petitions we have from Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho for the NCD, EGYE, and the remainder respectively. We're still working on all 3. Really all I've got in terms of an update on that, but we are spending a considerable amount of time working on all 3. So I don't know if Hugh, you want to go next and let's probably round that out.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I don't mean to jump ahead of our sister agency, the National Park Service, but I would be remiss if we didn't mention that we are working with Park Service and have out now started an EIS process for looking at options for restoring and managing grizzly bears in the North Cascades eco region, and associated with that, we're looking at a 10J rule for management of grizzlies when and if we get them back into the North Cascades eco region, which will provide us some important tools for helping to avoid and manage conflict if we can see that in the North Cascades area. I think coming back around to the mention of the mission of this organization, we believe that a reintroduction effort like that would help with conservation and recovery of grizzly bears. Things been looking into the future, so I think it aligns with what we're after here as part of this committee. And the first stage of that it's underway now, the scoping period. There's been a number of public meetings around that over the last couple of weeks. Still for public comments through the 14th of this month. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Hillary.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I guess I just wanted to update folks on our conflict hiring. I think in the summer meeting, we had just started or just finished the hiring process. We hired a number of conflict staff and everybody's on board. We got them on board. It took until the middle of the conflict season. So June, July is when people came on board. And so a lot of the time was, getting on the ground, getting equipment, figuring out relationships for a new agency, dealing with conflicts on the ground. And so that was a lot of work. In Montana, spent a lot of work on actually doing relocations due to a new state law. And also Ben, who's in the audience, spent a lot of time working with the forests, numerous forests on relocation plans, because again, that's new for us. And so we had to, and we're still to this day working through planning with the Forest Service and who do we call and the sites. It's a significant workload. So we're going to keep doing that this winter. Relocations, we're on number 1, number 2, education. So our staff did a ton of work to develop education programs and put them on, and whether it's going to schools, going to fairs, going to, wherever throughout Montana, in Wyoming as well. We have somebody in Jackson, and then we don't have somebody in Idaho, but we spent some time in northern Idaho doing some education work with our partner agencies and prevention projects. So that was the third prong. We did a lot of electric fences, a lot. And so this winter, we're going to be doing a lot of planning in terms of that. These guys are helping with other recovery projects, so GIS, updating our status assessment, and other service needs. Next year, that's going to be the bulk of our work, doing the relocations. Education and prevention is huge. And so we're happy to be able to help fill that need, because that's like a never ending need to do the education and prevention.
Thanks, Hillary. Any questions for Fish and Wildlife Service? Report. Okay, the next report then will be Wyoming Game and Fish.
Yeah, thanks, David. So in Wyoming, I'll start off with some of our education efforts. Our Bearwise Wyoming program continues to do great work. We have a longstanding cooperative effort in Jackson with Bearwise Jackson. They recently this summer put into place some Teton County regulations that address conflict, and actually have some new regulations that require bear-proof dumpsters and garbage containers in Teton County. So pretty neat development there. Our Bearwise crew has done some continued community efforts in Waukee, at Soroka Front, Pinedale, and Du Bois. We put together a how-to video for electric fencing. And then we've continued to have a large carnivore section put on living in large carnivore country workshops across the state. These have been ongoing for more than a decade now, and they're really popular with folks and great outreach effort. We did partner with SCI and the American Bear Foundation and had 4 bear spray giveaways in Cody, Lander, Jackson, and Pinedale this year. I think we gave away somewhere between 400 and 500 cans of bear spray. Our monitoring efforts continued. We were able to carry out captures in Sunlight in Crandall and Moccasin Basin as well. That was made a little tough with some heavy duty flooding this year, but crew got it done. We also carried out observation flights, and several folks from our large carnivore section, Justin Clapp and Dan Thompson, worked with Frank and others on the study team and worked hard this fall to pull together some data for the demographic workshop, which we'll talk more about later. So appreciate their work in that regard. We did have several high profile human wildlife interactions, some that resulted in significant injuries. Those received quite a bit of attention regionally and nationally as well. But despite that, the conflict workload this year was probably just moderate to average, maybe. We have a study that's underway in the Upper Green right now to look at the ability of livestock producers to detect losses from grizzly bears. This is part of an effort to inform the way we compensate landowner or livestock producers for losses. The Game and Fish Department has an extensive compensation program for livestock loss, and this study will help us address how best to compensate producers for losses. That program's been in place for a long time, and we think it's really important that it provides some ability to help maintain support for this critter on the landscape. Just 2 other quick things. So again, we continue to see expansion well beyond the DNA of grizzly bears, which keeps our crew, our large carnivore folks and game wardens and biologists extremely busy. This year, we spent approximately $1.7 million on direct expenses managing grizzly bears, and about $2.4 million if you include salaries and other overhead expenses. So it's a big program for our department, pretty heavy lift. Really appreciate our large carnivore section and the partnerships there and work with the federal agencies as well. That's it for Wyoming.
Thanks, Rick. Questions for Rick?
Rick, has your high school started a national training wrestling campaign after you got all the publicity about the wrestling kids who wrestled the grizzly bear?
No, they have not, but those kids certainly received a lot of recognition for their effort.
Okay, so next up is Idaho Fish and Game, Jim Fredericks.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the obvious. I'm not Ed Schriever. So I am here because Ed has announced his retirement and asked me to step in to his role here on the committee, recognizing that he wasn't going to be able to see the timing of this is not lost on me. He assumes the role of chair here at the end of this meeting. So he was anticipating that rather than sit in here and play this role today, he would turn it over to me. I know that's generated a little concern on some folks' part about Idaho playing musical chairs with the role of vice chair and chair. And just want to assure folks that my intention is to see this through, assuming that we have the support of the other states, and I believe we do. And then, of course, assuming that I have the support of whoever my next boss is, my intent is to serve out the next 2 years as chair. So appreciate the opportunity to do that. Little bit on conflict. When Ed reported conflict in the July meeting, he'd mentioned that we actually were having, unlike Wyoming, we were having a higher than normal season of conflicts. We had unfortunately removed a sow and a yearling and a sow and 2 yearlings out of the greater Yellowstone area, and then 2 adult males out of the Panhandle. In addition, there was a bear killed during a defensive charge in the Panhandle, and then a bear killed by mistaken identity in the Yellowstone ecosystem. So that was the report last July. Sorry to report that we've had one more lethal removal of a sow with 2 cubs of the year. That people likely heard about that. That was in the Teutonia area. That was a very unfortunate circumstance where those bears were hanging out near Mammoth Village in the park and were hazed out of there. They took up residence near Gardner and were again hanging out in a rural subdivision. They were trapped, moved to the border, went pretty much straight down to the Teutonia area where they again took up residence in a rural subdivision, tried to haze them out of there, were unable to keep them out and made the determination that they needed to be lethally removed. And so, unfortunate circumstance, that certainly didn't end the way that anybody wanted. All of those conflicts weren't through lack of working on conflict management. We removed 30 to 40 roadkills and other carcasses in occupied areas. We removed thousands of pounds of apples from Ashton. And we were able to encourage a half a dozen business owners to transition to bear-resistant containers, many more so working hard on the community awareness elements. IDFT personnel attended 20 outreach events in Island Park and reached approximately almost 2,000 people. So that's the update on education and human bear conflicts. Still dealing with some lawsuits, a couple of lawsuits that are endeavoring to curtail hunting and trapping opportunities in areas outside of existing grizzly bear occupied areas. So one of those is to eliminate bear baiting on federal lands outside of areas where grizzly bears occupy, where our IDFG commission has already prohibited the use of baiting. So the other is to end wolf trapping in 4 of Idaho's 7 regions, again, much of which is not occupied by grizzly bears. And so I bring that up because that certainly does present a challenge for us in terms of cultivating public support, community support for grizzly bear expansion outside of occupied range when a lot of people have strong feelings about use of federal lands and their trapping and hunting opportunities in those areas. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Jim. Questions for Jim? Yeah, I mentioned that Montana will be joining us a little bit later. So I will turn it to Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Okay, pretty quick update for y'all. We continue our outreach efforts in the Selkirks, like many have said already, in partnership with the Kalispell tribe and with Defenders of Wildlife. And so bear spray giveaways and outreach events, trash cans, and also some mailers and newspaper ads. We're able to find a little bit of internal support this for 2023 to get some electric fence kits and some electric fence demos going on that will be going on in that area. So that's great. Of course, the big news in Washington is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Park Service efforts to initiate the EIS for recovery in the North Cascades. We just, as in the last iteration of that effort, the 2015 initiation. Thanks for the nod. WDFW intends to participate as a cooperating entity, and then our role will be to provide technical assistance, local expertise, and help evaluate alternatives and impacts. there is a Washington state law that restricts WDFW's ability to transplant or introduce grizzly bears into the state, and may only use native bears or Washington bears for management purposes. So as things progress, WDFW would not participate in any introduction efforts. Should the alternative be selected in that way. But we all, under the law, also requires us to participate in all the conversations. And so we'll be doing that and support the services in their efforts. And then this is not grizzly bear specifically related, but I thought I'd bring it up because it could mean a big deal. So I'm proud of my agency and our efforts to, if our legislative session starts in January, and we have put forward a bold request, funding request for conservation forward funding to implement our state wildlife action plan. So focused on species of greatest conservation need. It's a $47.6 million biennial request. So it would be a game changer, just like other potentials. And so it would be, focusing on listed species and recovering them, and then on species of greatest conservation need and keeping others from being listed. So habitat actions, protection, recovery actions, etc. That's it.
I have a question. So I think what I heard you say is if you go to the repopulation, the state can't participate in bringing bears, but because there's two options, right? Possibly bears from Canada, bears from somewhere else, or is that, from somewhere else in the States? Is that accurate?
If an alternative were to include bears from within Washington, then WDFW could participate. But if the alternatives are bringing bears from anywhere but Washington, then we will not be participating in that.
And how many bears do you think you have now in Washington?
Like,
Not many.
30.
We would not take them from.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
NCDE or from Canada.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought I remembered, but I've read so much the last couple of days trying to remember bits and pieces. Okay.
Yes, it's not really a viable source population within the state.
Oh, wait, Matt has one.
Your comment, this is a great question for any of the state folks, but your comment about the state fund that the funding effort you're pursuing, just curious if you guys are getting real-time updates on Rawa. Last I heard was like a week ago. Folks were pretty optimistic that now that a funding source has been identified, potential to get it included in the omnibus, but haven't heard anything. Just curious, any updates? Are you still feeling good about it, or?
And that's what I have heard most recently, that there's still strong potential that it could make it into the omnibus.
David, question for Hannah. So just to be clear, you're actually asking for state funds to
Yes.
implement your swap. And so if RAWA comes through, that would be over and above what?
It would be the complement, right? So it would be matched,
Okay.
and as well as, it would be.
Yeah.
So we're really asking, we don't want to wait.
Yeah.
So it is really a bold ask. It's pretty exciting.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So next, joining us online from British Columbia, Garth Mowat.
Hello again, everyone. I should have said that I'm here. I'm the large carnivore specialist for the province of British Columbia, to the north of you, and I'm here representing Michael Burwash, who is the Director of Wildlife in British Columbia. And I'll just give you a couple of updates, and these are high-level things that are going on with grizzly bears in southern British Columbia, because I assume northern British Columbia is not that relevant to most of you in the room today. At the highest level, we're working on a management plan. It started out being called a grizzly bear management plan. We've never had one in British Columbia. I know that seems amazing to you, given we've had bears for a long, long time, but it was always extremely controversial to try to actually get public agreement on a management plan. We got mandated to do that by our minister a number of years ago, and that was the first time that I think the wildlife branch has given serious consideration to having management plan, because we all knew it was going to be an extremely controversial thing. Since that time, the hunt for grizzly bears in the province was shut down 3 years ago now. And so it seems, and we've spent 2 years talking to First Nations and First Nations only about the plan. We have drafted a plan, and the plan has been co-drafted between the government of British Columbia and the First Nations of British Columbia. There has been no other public participation, and that public participation is anticipated to start in January. It's very much a framework for local conservation. So it pushes a lot of land management decisions down to local areas that would be much more relevant to you folks, for example, because 3 of your populations border directly on the populations we would be talking about, and the local plans would be created for those areas, such as the Selkirks, as we just talked about. The other focus of that management plan is viewing, and grizzly bear viewing and bear viewing in general are big growth industries in British Columbia, and they have been very little regulated and not very much managed by the province either, because we tended not to manage non-consumptive industries. And that is starting to change for a number of reasons, and if no other reason than because all of these non-consumptive industries like backcountry skiing or what have you have increased dramatically in the province. So that's a big focus of our upcoming, we've called it a grizzly bear stewardship plan. Secondly, so I'm going to orient you. The Stein grizzly bear population is on the west side of the Fraser River. So it is northwest of where you are now. It is a very small population of 20 grizzly bears. It's isolated. It has been isolated from the larger grizzly bear population in British Columbia by the Fraser River. The Fraser River is a massive river, and we do not get any female bears swimming across that river. It goes through a canyon at that point. It's many, many kilometers long, several hundred kilometers long. And this population of 20 bears has been declining for 25 years, 20 years at least. We're hoping to augment that population, to outcross it, because it's showing a number of signs of genetic failure. It has very low, very poor survival of cubs, in that about a third what we see in the rest of the province. We started to do a augmentation this summer. Unfortunately, the very first bear that we caught died in transit, and the program was shut down. So that program has gone back to the drawing board, and it will be raised again in the future. There is the other population that was already talked about, the North Cascades population. We have been talking about the feasibility, and I guess we've been talking about recovering that population for 2 years with First Nations. They have been our main partner, and they have been the main motivator, more so than the government in many ways. And now we're doing 2 things, two pieces of work. One is a feasibility study around recovering that population in Canada, and a communications and engagement plan. And we started work on that. So those are the 2 fronts we're working on. And the engagement plan, we don't have a formal consultation process like you have in the United States, but there is great expectation within our elected officials that the full public consultation about recovering that grizzly bear population. We have a program that is a government-private cooperative called Wild Safe BC. It used to be called Bear Aware. It has had a number of different names. It is our public-facing program to conserve grizzly bears. It has always been soft-funded for over 20 years. There's never been a budget line item in a provincial government budget in British Columbia to fund this program. And yet it is a multi-million-dollar program, and it has done a lot of great things in British Columbia. I won't even go into how many they are, but we are trying to get that program funded on hard dollars so it has some continuity and security into the future. That's a big push for myself and the other carnivore biologists in the province. The last thing I want to mention to you, so I think you all know where Vancouver is, just north of Seattle. Grizzly bears were extirpated from the area around Vancouver and have been for quite a long time. The Fraser Valley lowlands, for example, we call that often. And as bears have recovered in the province over the last 40 years, there have been grizzly bears show up north of Vancouver, up what we call the Sunshine Coast. It's a string of small communities that runs up past Squamish, and Squamish is the gateway into Whistler. Many of you know where the Whistler ski hill area is, the Whistler complex is. We are now just starting to discuss with local First Nations, local biologists, regional offices, how we might plan around recovering grizzly bears in that area around Vancouver. It's a fairly controversial topic because this is our large center, and it's not clear where and how many bears are wanted in this area. They are starting to show up there anyway. We've certainly seen some strong recovery in the Squamish River area, only about 50 miles north of Vancouver. And other areas, none at all. That is all I have for you.
Thank you, Garth. Questions for Garth? So Garth, just to be clear on those two actions you mentioned for North Cascades, that's for the unit in British Columbia that has the name North Cascades.
Yeah. Yep. We do very little planning for the United States and Canada here. So no, it's really about Canada, but I think it's evident. I think everybody in the room knows that if we proceed with recovery on our side, it's going to mean it's one unit. I'm pretty sure the bears are, when we let them go in Canada, they're going to go, half of them are going to go into the States. And that's probably true if you let them go in the States, half of them probably going to go into Canada. It is one continuous unit with two large parks, one in Canada and one in the States, sort of anchoring that unit. So we are talking about the same population unit, the same area, but we are only talking about the Canadian side at this point. And I think, David, we should perhaps close that by saying we do not have a formal line of communication or discussion about co-recovery in the two countries open right now, other than discussion at the subcommittee level. And I am on the subcommittee, the North Cascades subcommittee. And I don't know if that is needed now. At some point, I am sure it will be needed. And the timing of that, I don't know better than anybody else in the room, but.
Thank you, Garth. Don, you popped on. Does that mean you have a question?
No, I was just giving some verbal recognition to Garth of the complexity of the relationship there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that update.
You're welcome.
So now from sort of states and provinces to our land managers, and we'll start with the Forest Service. We have 4 regions of the Forest Service here on this executive group. I don't know who to look at first here.
Let's go online to Elise first for Region 4.
And can you guys hear me?
Ma'am.
All right,
And
thanks.
see.
All right, good. So apologies. I don't have my information collected very well right now. And so, Jackie, I'm going to go ahead and defer to you or to one of the other regional representatives to lead out on that.
How about if I jump in, because we kind of border each other, don't we? So,
that sounds great.
Going for Region 2, because I think it's probably similar with the Caribou Targhee and the Bridger Teton, as we share so much of that area. You know, on our side, I would say it was a little quieter of a year. I mean, we're focusing, you know, on the Forest Service, continuing to focus on conflicts and working with, you know, ranchers, permittees, and communities. You've heard a little bit about, you know, Jackson jumping out and really doing some good work as a community. Cody, of course, has had some good work ongoing up there for quite a few years. And credit Wyoming Game and Fish, my friend Rick down there. They've done a lot of work, and that benefits us, right? At least that really benefits us. So we just are continuing to do that work with the communities and with our folks that are out there on the landscape, whether it's an outfitter, our outfitter guides, or our ranchers and operators. And, you know, I think, of course, you heard a little bit about on the Idaho side, I think your conflict was probably higher than my conflict, at least, you know, for what maybe happened on some of the Region 4 landscape for the US Forest Service, but you know, it's that two-sided coin. There's a good bear population out there, and there's a even bigger and more robust human population getting out there. So, you know, we're working through that. But I do think our cooperation with the partners on both all around for the Forest Service, at least in that area, is continues to be improved upon. Communication, you know, it's easy when you have a lot of time to be able to track folks down to communicate. Tougher when you have a few moments to try to get a hold of folks and work through some of the more tense situations. So we'll just have to keep working on it. But positive steps forward, I'd say, for our partner force for us. To get 2 for 1 or 2,
Yeah.
1.5 for 2.
So-
However.
Ben or Kristen?
Actually, David, this is my first time here and I haven't received the briefing. So.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, then we'll go with Kristen. Real quick.
Sure, I'll be brief on my briefing. We put into the room that prior to this meeting, and after we learned about the EIS, throwing out with the notice of intent, you know, I've been in discussions with Dan Shively, our Director for Natural Resources in Region 6, and talked to Kristen Bale a little bit on the Okanagan and Wenatchee. Haven't had an opportunity to connect with Jody Wheel on the MBS National Forest, but certainly we're very interested in the intersections and the points at which we will engage as a cooperating agency and partner in this effort. And similar to what Hannah shared, just, you know, points that might require some technical engagement across agencies and learning more about that. So to the degree possible, I have seen the goals and the sequencing of those. And I know Kristen provided some updates to having back here prior to this week's meeting. So we're paying obviously very close attention and want to track that and find out when and how we'll be involved. The other thing that I would share that is maybe redundant from the subcommittee report out for the North Cascades, but obviously there's a lot of infrastructure build out right now on the Mount Baker, Snoqualmie, Oakland, and continues on the Colville. I believe there were upward of 130 food lockers and dumpsters put into place on the Mount Baker, Snoqualmie just this past summer, and they're really close to their food storage order implementation in early 2023. Oakland is focusing first on infrastructure. They have a lot more to put out on the ground and install, and then they will follow up with food storage orders after that. So that is my very brief report for Region 6.
Great. Any questions for any Forest Service representatives? Okay, a lot going on with Park Service. We've got Jennifer Carpenter here.
I'll go first. Don's got a bigger news than I do. So I represent the Intermountain region, as I mentioned, Yellowstone, Brent Teton, and Glacier. Yellowstone this year, as Jackie said, in the GYE, it was a quiet year, knock on wood. No conflicts within the park, at least, natural mortalities only. I did want to give a shout out, as I did at the YES meeting, to Fish and Wildlife Service, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and Wyoming Game and Fish for the cooperation in dealing with bears along our boundaries in the gateway communities. Certainly Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the Gardner issue that we had, real helpful with us. So big thank you to all of you guys. Grand Teton, update from there is bear-wise, Jackson Hole continues to move forward. I know, Rick, you mentioned that too. They hired a program manager to coordinate interagency efforts with the park in Teton County and Wyoming Game and Fish. So that's moving forward. Again, Teton County has really taken a big leap in terms of community engagement with bear-wise concepts and Bear Smart that we've been working on at the IGBC level. And Glacier, I don't have any updates. No news is good news, I'm going to say. So that's it for this side of the divide in terms of bears.
Okay. Don Stryker.
Awesome. Thanks, David. This is mostly redundant. I probably should have said earlier, my day job is the superintendent of the North Cascades Park Service Complex. It's 3 units of the National Park Service. I'm representing the Pacific West Legacy region of the Park Service, just so you know how we divide that up with respect to this committee. I'll do the Washington piece, right? So that's sort of how the Park Service is rolling. When we get into the Department of Interior's integrated regions, I think Jennifer probably covers 3 numbers, and we cover 3 or 4 numbers in this region. So we won't subject you to learning all of our Park Service internal lingo. This is redundant, I'm sure, because you've already heard the news from Hugh and Jennifer and Hillary and Garth and Hannah. But we did recently kick off a new, but certainly not new to us, effort for preparing an EIS for grizzly bear recovery in the North Cascades ecosystem. The park is sort of the center of that, but at the end of the day, the park is only about 10% of the land. Almost 70 or 75% is Forest Service. So it's a lot of public land in this ecosystem that we're looking at. And I asked by the way, I share office space with the Forest Service. So we have good communication sort of at the ground level in that respect. And I was asking my Forest Service colleagues, how is it that the Park Service ended up being sort of in the target zone for this? And they laughed at me and said, because you have an organic act and we don't. So, the take-home message is that between the 3 federal agencies and the state, we have an amazing partnership to pull off what is really a big, and I think, Garth, it's a controversial initiative on this side of the border too. It is requiring close collaboration with our tribes and formal consultation, as you indicated. We've done 4 scoping meetings so far. So we're relatively early in the process, but we're not forgetting about the body of work from the last 2 incarnations of when we considered doing an EIS. I think what I would share with folks too, from the Park Service's perspective, it's really interesting in being in this place and time in the North Cascades ecosystem, and we sort of have the ability to think about adaptive management as a perspective or as a practice, right? When we look at recovery actions, and when we look at successes and failures in Yellowstone and other places, this notion of Fish and Wildlife doing a 10J, an experimental population rulemaking, at the same time as we're doing the EIS, becomes pivotally important from my perspective, and really for 2 reasons. One is you listen to Garth talk about what's going on the other side of the border and the bears that don't necessarily check their passports. So if we in fact want to have an experimental population, it's sort of important that we do that initiative before bears start wandering down from Canada, and then we wouldn't have the ability to have that flexibility. But on the ground, I think a lot of people have learned lessons from the other states and would like to have more tools in that toolbox associated with how you actually manage conflict bears or problems when you're talking about a recovery effort. So, the nexus of all of the various partners and being able to hear and learn lessons from everybody else, I think is just happening at a critical time. It might be worth pointing out too that my first park as a Park Service employee was Yellowstone. I was there in the 90s when we reintroduced wolves. I watched grizzly bear work, and even though I was the bean counter, when I got to go do fun operational projects, some of the first things that I was doing was taking roadkill elk carcasses out and putting them in the targeted grizzly bear zone. So I sort of got my hands dirty, learning some of the ropes. And since that time, I go back and hunt every year. Initially, for the first 10 years or so, we were hunting the DuBois area. And now I'm actually down in Lander. So I get plenty of feedback from sort of interested grizzly and wolf stakeholders on the ground in Montana and Idaho and Wyoming. So it's really good to hear all of the different perspectives that people have, and it's pivotal, I think, as we start the process here in the North Cascades ecosystem. I'll say so far, even though we're only about a month into this thing, we've gotten really good feedback, not just from sort of the formal partners, but we've also got we've had some good consultation sessions with the tribes, and we've gotten some requests for some more sessions, including across the boundary, Garth, with First Nations. And we've also heard from a bunch of our landowner partners, and I think that's a really positive thing. So, from the Park Service perspective, as we look forward in Washington, it's going to be a super busy year next year because we're committed to meeting in person with everybody who invites us and wants to talk about this topic. And I will leave it there.
That's a lot. So, and we've all been waiting for it, so thank you.
Thanks, Don, and thanks, Jennifer. So next up is the Bureau of Land Management. We have Chris Boone.
Hello, everyone. I'm sitting in for Ruth Miller. She's our Deputy State Director of Human Resources. I had 3 brief updates. First is our bios. They have been for years. They work actively with the public and our BLM permit holders with regard to bear safety and awareness. Second, those bios are also, because of the bears actively moving, they are revealing their ongoing actions for events not previously considered, whether we need to reinitiate or initiate consultation with the service where we haven't. Third, our food storage order is in good position. It's a solid draft. It has been developed by myself, Katie Stevens, who is our Western District Manager. We sent it out to the field, had it reviewed by BLM biologists, other resource specialists, recreation, and some managers. So we received comments and we have some concerns expressed. So we're going to schedule a follow-up meeting, likely in January, to sit down with that group and discuss it further and try and get it in better shape. I anticipate the next steps after that. We'll move into senior leadership review. That's all I have.
Thanks so much, Chris. And finally, our science partner in the group, the United States Geological Survey.
Thanks, David. So it seems like there are always some new folks at the table, and for your benefit, just a little bit of a refresher. USGS coordinates the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team, and the study team, the IGBST, is it's really a model example of co-production of science with research scientists and managers working together. And I just want to say that we've actually been cited in the literature as the model for how to do co-production of science, which is kind of a big buzzword these days. So that's kind of the primary role of USGS in the grizzly bear world, although we also do research on grizzly bears up in the NCDE, particularly in Glacier National Park with our Park Service partners. The IGBST, the work that's focused on the Yellowstone ecosystem bears, in 2022, despite not having full field capacity due to budget constraints, we did have another successful and safe field season. And safe is important because it's very risky work that these folks are doing. And then a notable a notable accomplishment in, this year was the fact that IGBST hosted a demographic monitoring workshop. So the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee had tasked the IGBST with updating the demographic parameters for the Yellowstone ecosystem. And so this workshop was held recently. All of the study team members participated. And then we invited 5 additional topical experts from outside of the study team. So these were either USGS experts from other places, Fish and Wildlife Service experts, and scientists from the University of Montana. So the primary goals of that workshop were to review the demographic data and the estimates for the Yellowstone ecosystem population. And what's really notable, and that's very important work for informing conservation management. And these workshops don't happen frequently. So the last time we did a demographic workshop was in 2012. It's notable that we have 40 years or more of very high quality data that we can rely on for making population estimates and also for leveraging against a whole suite of other research topics. Just good to periodically come together, look at this rich data set and update those, all the various complex facets of the demographic monitoring. And if Frank, do you want to add anything to that about the workshop?
The only thing I would add is that one accomplishment was that we looked at, as we have reported to this committee and our subcommittees in the past, we're moving towards an integrated population model approach, and we're doing that together with other ecosystems. And we're 4 years in now, so we're not just jumping into it. We've evaluated it to the point where we are now ready to start the implementation process. And that's going to take some time and some coordination with our state and federal partners.
So if I may, because I want to highlight or recognize that work that you all are talking about, you know, as we talk about moving from recovery to delisting to conservation, what you're doing in that work is critical to us having, you know, the information needed to be able to say, where are we at? Where are the bears at? And I think, and you know, that was part of the work that we talked about, you know, to move to delisting, then we've got to have some critical pieces of that. And so I have gained so much more. I mean, I always had respect for what you guys did, but I think I have a whole different level of respect and understanding for the critical work that you're doing in putting us in a position to say whether or not we are in the place we need to be. So really cannot say enough about you, what you're doing and how it's going to help. So I just want to recognize that.
Thank you, Jackie. And it is a really, I mean, it's a, you know, it's such a, it's such an excellent asset for the people of the United States that we have this rich data set. We know so much about the population, but we're also able to address research questions that we'd never be able to address without such a rich population understanding. So thank you for the.
You're on my Christmas card list. Oh, no, you are so. Thanks.
Any further questions for USGS? So the one other person I want to recognize, we're fortunate to have the United States Department of Agriculture, APHIS Wildlife Services. John Steiber is here with us. We're going to be talking conflict and hearing from some partners that work with your agency directly. Is there anything that you'd like to share, and not to put you on the spot?
I guess it'd be good to let everybody know we've got some new personnel in the States. Dalen Kidwell, I don't know if you caught it. He's the new, relatively new, a year and a couple months state director of Montana. He was the Eastern Montana District Supervisor. Idaho, Jared Hidelius has been in Idaho for a couple of years, I think, as the state director down there and stuff, still relatively new. In Wyoming, the state director position is currently vacant, so we'll have an acting state director. In Wyoming, Mike Burrell will be acting state director. He's out of Cody. He's a district supervisor out of Cody. But we do intend to fill that position, but it is vacant. Has been since, I guess, November, something like that, so. Every state is so different. Wyoming Game Fish takes the lead on all the grizzly bear conflicts and stuff, and we help out when you all ask for help. Idaho and Montana are different. We take the lead on all livestock depredations and so on. So, of course, by far, most of our grizzly bear work is in Montana, by far. And I think Dale and I could probably, if I'm right in probably saying there was a little bit of a little bit fewer conflicts this year than there were last year. Last year being the record year where we had 181 investigations. This year we were down to 137 livestock depredation investigations. So pretty significant decline this year.
What was the first number? How much was it down? I mean,
Last year was 181 investigations. That doesn't mean that's how many livestock were killed. Oftentimes there's multiple, or not often, but sometimes there's multiple depredations on each investigation, but it was 181 last year. And that are FY 21, and FY 22 was 137. So that's a fairly significant decline. And that's the first time we've had that kind of decline.
yeah, we'll take it. Yeah.
The trend was certainly up. That's all I had.
Does the new state director get credit for that?
Yeah,
Maybe.
there he is.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks for joining us. And so I think that what we'll do, Jackie, is we'll take the break now. So 15 minutes, which means we're back at 2:51. We're going to be specific about it. Then we'll hear the conservation strategy presentation. So thank you.